All right, so today we're diving deep into a topic that's pretty crucial in international relations.
Yeah.
And, of course, something that could definitely pop up on your UPSC exams.
If absolutely.
We're talking about color revolutions.
Ah, wow.
These waves of uprisings, they swept through the post-Soviet states, early 21st century,
Right.
and they each had like their own symbolic color.
Yeah.
Rose,
Yeah.
orange, tulip. But the big question here is, were these movements really, coming from the people? Or was there maybe something else going on behind the scenes?
Well, that's what we're here to unpack, right? I mean, on the face of it, these revolutions had all the signs of a real, grassroots movement.
Right.
People were fed up. They were tired of corrupt regimes. Often these regimes were pro-Moscow.
Yeah.
And people wanted something different. They yearned for democracy, freedom, a system that actually worked for them, not just for the people in power. It's easy to see why these color revolutions caught on with so many people, not just within those countries, but in the West as well.
So let's look a bit deeper then. Besides the public discontent, what other factors might have contributed to these revolutions?
Well, we can't ignore the role of Western institutions,
Okay.
specifically the National Endowment for Democracy.
The NED.
Yeah, the NED. Now it's funded by the U.S. Congress, and it gives grants to groups that are, pro-democracy all over the world.
Right.
And yeah, they were definitely active in these countries, the ones where these color revolutions happened. They were supporting various civil society organizations.
Interesting. But this involvement, this support from the NED, it's often viewed with suspicion, especially by countries like Russia.
Right, absolutely.
So why is that? Why would Russia be so wary of the NED's activities?
Well, think about it from their perspective.
Yeah.
To Russia, the NED is meddling right in their backyard, in their sphere of influence. It's
Yep.
like, imagine a circle around Russia encompassing all those former Soviet states. Russia sees that whole region as crucial, strategically vital. And any whiff of Western influence there, they see it as a direct threat to their interests.
So basically, it boils down to geopolitics.
Exactly. Power dynamics, who has it, who wants it. And that's where things get really interesting, I think. B.H. Liddell Hart, a very important military strategist, talked about this idea of fighting on the other side of the hill.
Okay, I'm not familiar with that.
So basically, it means you weaken your opponent indirectly
Okay.
through political moves, destabilization. You don't engage in direct confrontation. And you can see how the color revolutions, whether intentionally or not, they kind of fit into this concept.
So even if the West wasn't actively trying to overthrow these regimes, their actions might have inadvertently contributed to that outcome.
Yeah, exactly. It's about unintended consequences, the ripple effects that actions on the global stage can have. And we should also note, this whole color revolution model, it wasn't just limited to the former Soviet bloc.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. We've seen similar things happen in West Asia, Africa, even parts of South Asia. And this, of course, has raised concerns for countries like China who worry about potential Western interference in their affairs.
That makes sense. It's like a blueprint for regime change that can be adapted and applied to different situations around the world. But let's go back to the color revolutions for a second. Initially, there was so much hope surrounding them. Did they really bring about the transformation people were hoping for? Or was there a gap between expectations and reality?
Yeah, that's the real question, isn't it? Did these revolutions actually deliver? At first, there was a lot of optimism. People really thought things would change, a new era of democracy and all that. But as we often see, the reality turned out to be, well, more complicated.
So what went wrong? What prevented these color revolutions from really reaching those goals?
One big issue was the elites. The old, corrupt ones were pushed out, sure, but they were often replaced by a new set of elites. And these new elites, despite all their promises of reform, often just continued the same practices.
So same game, different players.
Yeah, pretty much. And this led to a lot of disillusionment, People realized that just changing the faces in power didn't really mean meaningful change for their everyday lives.
Can you give us an example of how this played out?
Sure. Let's take Georgia's Rose Revolution. At first, it seemed like a huge success.
Yeah.
You had Mikhail Saakashvili, this young, charismatic leader. He came in promising a clean break from the past. And to be fair, there were some positive things that happened.
Like what?
Well, He made some progress in fighting corruption, and there was some modernization of the economy.
But it sounds like it wasn't all smooth sailing.
No, not really. Saakashvili's rule over time became more authoritarian.
How so?
People accused him of consolidating power, cracking down on anyone who disagreed with him, and there were allegations of corruption, using his position for his own benefit.
So, a cautionary tale then.
Yeah, it shows that just changing the leader doesn't automatically mean you get a real democracy.
It seems like those underlying problems, like weak institutions, lack of rule of law, they were the real obstacles.
Exactly. If you want a truly democratic society, you need more than just getting rid of a dictator or holding elections. You need a culture of transparency, accountability, respect for individual rights. That takes a long time to build.
Okay, so let's zoom out a bit. What does all this mean for color revolutions today? I mean, the world has changed so much since the early 2000s.
Right. The global landscape is completely different.
You have the rise of China, Russia's more assertive, and even the West is rethinking its foreign policy.
You're right. The old world order is gone. We're in a multipolar world now, with new power centers emerging all the time.
So has the war in Ukraine changed things? Has it affected the effectiveness of these color revolutions or the West's willingness to support them?
That's a tough one. The war has definitely affected Russia, that's for sure. But it's too early to say they're out of the game. They might be focusing more on consolidating power closer home, but they can still project power, and they can still undermine Western interests.
Okay.
And as for the West, well, they're facing their own problems, both at home and abroad. And there's a growing debate about whether it's even effective or wise to intervene in other countries' affairs.
So both Russia and the West are kind of recalibrating.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
But where does that leave a country like Georgia? They're caught in the middle, still dealing with the aftermath of their own color revolution.
Georgia is a really interesting case, actually, because it shows us the long-term consequences of these revolutions. It's been 2 decades since the Rose Revolution, but the country is still very polarized. You have the pro-Western groups and the pro-Russian groups, and they're both fighting for power. And there's a feeling that many of the promises of that revolution, they just haven't been fulfilled.
So Georgia's walking a tightrope.
Exactly. They're trying to maintain their independence, chart their own course, but they're facing pressure from both sides.
And that pressure comes from their location, right?
Of course, they're right between Russia and Europe. That makes them strategically very important. Both sides see Georgia as this key piece in the geopolitical game, and that makes them vulnerable to manipulation, to interference from outside.
Okay, so for our listeners who are studying for the UPSC exams, what are the key takeaways here? What should they be thinking about?
I think there are a few important things to remember. First, you need to really understand what a color revolution is. You need to be able to define it, explain the historical context, and analyze how it affected the countries involved.
So it's not just about memorizing facts and dates.
No, it's about understanding the bigger picture. You need to see how these revolutions connect to broader themes like democratization, globalization, the struggle for power in the world.
Seeing the connections, the motivations of the players involved, the strategies they used.
Right. And second, it's important to look at the outcomes of these revolutions critically. Why did some succeed while others failed? What were the unintended consequences, both within the country and internationally? And how did they change the global landscape?
So it's about going deeper than the headlines, really understanding what it takes to change a regime, to build a nation.
Exactly. And finally, you need to think about whether the color revolution model is still relevant today. Is it still a good strategy for promoting democracy? Or is it becoming less effective, even outdated, as the world changes?
So connect the historical context to current events. Analyze the trends we see today and form your own informed opinions.
That's it. These are all important things to consider, not just for exams, but for anyone who wants to understand how international relations work, how they shape the world we live in.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? I mean, were these revolutions ultimately successful? It's a question that definitely deserves more thought. And for all our listeners out there, especially those getting ready for the UPSC exams, we really encourage you to dig deeper into this. Look at color revolutions from all sides, explore those different perspectives, and come to your own conclusions.
Absolutely. Don't just take everything you read or hear as the truth. Question those assumptions, analyze the evidence, and really think critically. What were the long-term effects of these movements? It's important.
Yeah, because understanding these historical events and their impact, it's key to grasping the complexities of geopolitics today. It's not just about, cramming facts for an exam. It's about developing a real understanding of global power dynamics, how they shape the world around us.
And for our listeners who aren't prepping for the UPSC, this topic is still super relevant. I mean, these power struggles, they affect all of us one way or another. They shape the world we live in.
Right. It's about being informed, engaged citizens. It's about understanding how events are connected globally and how our own actions, our own choices, fit into the bigger picture.
So to wrap things up, we'll leave you with one final question, something to think about. Given how much the geopolitical landscape is changing with the rise of new powers and, the West kind of shifting its priorities, could we be seeing a new model of democratic change emerge? Or is the era of color revolutions fading away? Is it a strategy that's just not working anymore, becoming outdated?
That's a great question. We'd love to hear what you think. Leave a comment below, and let's keep this conversation going.
And if you're new to all this, I hope this deep dive has given you a good starting point. There's so much more to explore.
Absolutely. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our future deep dives. We'll be back soon with another episode, breaking down those complex issues and helping you navigate the world of current affairs.
Oh, and for this episode, we used a recent article from The Hindu. You should check it out if you want a more in-depth analysis.
Until next time, keep those brains working and stay curious.